when it comes to the worst aspects for us of borderline personality, why is it that your BPD partner doesn't want the diagnosis? They run away from the diagnosis. So what the fuck is that about? Well, our identity and the things that we put our identity around, right? The way that we try to ground our identity, typically, unless you feel like shit about yourself, usually your identity is something neutral to positive. When I act in ways that I don't like, usually I'm emotionally dysregulated. I feel a bit out of control. We've all been there, especially in abusive relationships. We start acting in ways that are kind of crazy, a little bit outside of ourselves, ways that we normally don't act. People call this getting fleas, borderline fleas or narcissistic fleas or whatever. I hate this term. I think it's really derogatory. However, I understand it. BPD is a trauma response. NPD is a trauma response. So of course, we're going to have our own similar, but also unique to us way of dealing with trauma. And trauma puts us into a state of dysregulation, a state of panic, where we start acting in ways that are less than rational. Part of our prefrontal cortex starts to shut down. That's the place where we can make our executive decisions. We're going more into sort of that mammalian or reptilian brain, more into the amygdala of warning signs all around us. So of course, we're not at our best. That doesn't feel like our identity. When you're dysregulated, you become codependent, but it's not your identity. And it's the reason why you have such a fear of putting that label on yourself, because it doesn't feel right. Why? It's happening to you when you're in a state of trauma. You drop into your codependency. That's why I talk about dropping into my codependency. And then I did a 12-step program, helped me get out of that codependency. But I know that I'm prone to it for life because it's my natural reaction to death, threat of death, or ego death. It's not that it's maybe 100% my reaction, maybe it's 80% my reaction, but that's still pretty high. That's high enough to say that, when push comes to shove, when shame is coming in, when death is threatening me, I'm more likely to freeze or camouflage or appease the attacker, right? That's my default. Borderline and narcissist defaults, when they're dysregulated, is really vicious abuse, right? Really vicious attack, fighting or running away. So when you say to a borderline, hey, you're abusive, they say, no, I'm not, or I was just dysregulated, or you made me do it, or that person made me do it. That's not the real me, because it's just like us. I say, I'm not codependent, I'm dysregulated, or I'm experiencing abuse as my reaction to abuse as a trauma response, which is true. It's not wrong. But remember that for you as an individual, you don't put your identity in your dysregulation. Your identity goes here when you feel stable and regulated, emotionally regulated. Then this is more my identity. This is me dysregulated. So that's your codependency, is when you're in dysregulation. And that's why sometimes it doesn't feel right, or it doesn't hit you right when someone says you are this, or if I say that, you're like, no, fuck you, I'm not that. This other person is more that than me. And that's because in our stable self, in our own mind, we're not like that. We share character traits with that extreme codependency. So I'm empathic, I'm kind, I'm considerate, I'm all of these things. But if I use those tools to too much of an extreme, I'm overly accommodating, I'm a carpet you can walk all over, and all this stuff that I need to anticipate what the next conversation is going to be like and how I'm going to bring up this issue, or trying to calm my own emotions so that I don't bring up that issue because I'm trying now to avoid conflict. Well, what is conflict? Conflict is ego death. Why? When someone shames you, shame is a threat to your ego. Your ego is your identity. It's a threat to your identity. What happens if you have no identity? You kind of don't exist, right? That's death. It's a different kind of death. It's not a physical death. It's like a metaphysical death, or it's a emotional death, or a social death. What's up, guys? I'm just in the editing room, and I wanted to add this point really quickly. I really want to make sure that this hits home with you. As I've said, usually our identity is like neutral to positive. When our identity gets really, really negative and really, really bad, It's when we become hopeless, you can become suicidal, things like this. Like that's your identity, right? It's not your body that's causing you the pain. When we're in emotional pain and all of this stuff, it's our identity, right? It's our ego that's truly under threat. When we think of being famous, when we think of being happy, all this stuff, it's not, sure, it's happening to our body, but really it's happening to us. It's happening to me, Jesse, the individual. So when your partner's shaming you, these are kind of death threats. So when you're under a bunch of death threats, you freeze and you fawn. That's your go-to. When you put them under death threat, often they fight or they run away. And of course, both ways we start to project more and more in the relationship. So the deeper you get into that codependency, the more you're going to project out fear and anticipating fear and then trying to get ahead of it. So it's going to happen more and more through the relationship. And because they're also dysregulated, they're going to project onto you that maybe you're a threat when you're totally not. And so they're going to come out and attack you or run away or whatever. As the relationship progresses, you do become more codependent and they do become more abusive. So both of these sort of identities of ours increase and increase and increase over time. And we both feel like it's not the real us. And we both feel like it was the other person who caused it. But if you say to somebody, you're this dysregulation, they're always going to say no. How about the narcissist? You say, hey, you're a narcissist. They say, no, I'm this perfect thing. That's how I identify when I feel stable.
One friend said to me, you have to be the most innocent man in the history of the United States over a period of 2.5 years, and they got nothing on me. I think I am a friend of mine said, you have to be the most perfect person.
They had everybody
else.
They don't want to be called a borderline because to them, that's their bad identity. That's the dark identity is right underneath that. And their shame, their core shame is to hide that and to be perfect. So what is their identity then? The borderline identity is tricky. It's you're the identity. When they're idealizing you and they're starting to take on a lot of your character traits and they're starting to take on a lot of your interests, right? And that's happening. That is their stable identity. That becomes their stable identity. So you in turn become that. And when they're dysregulated and they're in shame, they're losing aspects of that identity and then they're taking it on you. And even when they push you away, they're also losing some of that identity. Their dysregulated identity is that abuser, fight, flee, sometimes freeze fawn, but a lot of fight, flee. Freeze fawn is their stable identity. It's you. That's their stable identity, which is why 9 out of 10 borderlines, if you explain to them, this is codependency, this is what it is, they'll go, that's me. Oh my God, that's me. I'm always giving.
She was like, you are codependent as hell, you know? And everybody was just so, and then how people that love me so much were affected by that time. I don't think it would have penetrated and for me to really look at that part of myself if it hadn't been for how the people around me reacted.
I'm always giving. I'm giving up like everything for the other person. I'm so disappointed when it doesn't work. I do everything for them because they're going to identify with the most stable part of their identity, which is codependent, which is freeze and fawn. When they're dysregulated in fight and flee, that's not the real them. This is the real them until it's not. I mean, that's continually the real them, but it's centered around a different person. It's centered around whoever that favorite person is for them is how that's going to mold.
So Jada Pinkett Smith has talked about having CPTSD and codependency. To me, that sounds a lot like a borderline where they'll have this traumatic side that they're a little bit more detached from, but also living in every day, and then a codependent side. And Trump, he's just perfect, obviously. What about us? How about our denial? So you're about to see a clip from DeMars coaching from, I think it's about 6 years ago. And what you're going to see is you're going to see our denial and codependency. So you're going to see him as fervently deny his issues as your borderline denied theirs. As your narcissist, denied theirs. Or maybe owned up to some of it, but not all of it. You're going to see him do the exact same thing with codependency. Now, you may have noticed that the background in this room is a little bit different. It's because that other clip 3 months ago, I actually did a long form video after this, link in description, where I look at this video and then a few more of his to see, like, did this guy change or did he not? So, spoiler alert, he's changed. And he's now healed. So I felt a little bit awkward putting in the video at first because it's like, well, you know, I'm seeing somebody like in a really kind of embarrassing, I'm embarrassed for him because also I'm highlighting this and being like, look how fucked up this is. But then I felt worse about it afterwards because I was like, well, clearly he's changed. Like he surpassed this. So I was like, God, maybe I need to take this out. But it's just such a good clip. To me, it's just so perfect.
The most perfect.
Because I can relate to it. That's why it's so perfect. Okay? It's not because I'm so healed and he's so not and ha ha ha. No. That's me. A few years ago, I would have liked, commented, subscribed. Maybe I would have even paid for his coaching. But I look at it now as somebody who's healed, that this is somebody who is not healed. This is someone who is still in their trauma. They're still in their denial. You already know this a little bit. If you think about people who you see online or maybe in person who are in an abusive relationship with someone who you suspect has BPD or NPD, you can tell that person, hey, you're being abused. And they're still in the fog. They're still in denial. They're like, no, it was just Wednesday and, you know, I don't know, the Mercury retrograde. That's it. And you're like, no, this is abuse. I don't know. Does my partner, are they really borderline or are they narcissist? And I don't know. And you'll be like, yes, they're one of both or both. Who cares? You're not going to change them. Things aren't going to change. This dynamic will continue to happen until they get help, and it's going to take them a long time. You went from a place where at some point you denied that you were even in abuse. And maybe you went, holy shit, I was in abuse. Then you went to a place where you went, personality disorders, do they, do they not? Do they, do they not? They do. And so you got to kind of a place of acceptance of both. But the last piece, the final boss is you. And you need to be able to look at yourself and go, oh, I got to fix that now? Fuck. This is it, right? That's a final piece. And I can see from his videos now, he's healed that final piece. He's looked at it and he's made good with it in a way that I'm sure had a lot of self-love and compassion and acceptance. It's really amazing to see, actually. It's super inspiring to see his change. This is him in trauma, thinking he's not even in trauma because he's coaching people. He's trying to help you out of your trauma when he's still in his, but he doesn't know he's in it because he can't look at the thing that we label codependency. And maybe he doesn't even use that term. Maybe he didn't use that term to heal. At that point, maybe we're just playing a bit of semantics. So when you watch this video, watch it in compassion. And if you are totally in agreement with him, yeah, he's totally right, then watch that long form video or just fast forward to the end of the long form video and see who he is now, or just jump over his channel, see who he is now. He's not the same guy. He's healed that part, and that will give, I hope, inspiration for you to heal as well, no matter how you do it. If you're not going to see your covert identity, you can't heal. Just like the borderline and the narcissist, they ain't going to heal until they can look at their covert identity and embrace it. All right, here it is.
Hello everybody, my name is David. Thank you for watching Crazy Narcissist Ex-Girlfriend. Today's topic is about codependency. I have made other videos and I've talked about codependency before, and I don't really care for it. When you go into a therapist and your problem is a relationship, and you begin to tell that therapist that the person abused you and cheated on you and hit you and all that, and then she or he finds out that you've been with them for 4 years, you're instantly going to be labeled a codependent. And I understand that from the therapist's point of view. Okay, I understand that. Codependent relationships is when you enable a person's addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement. My ex was immature. She was irresponsible. She was an underachiever. Now I know she had poor mental health. But I did not enable that. And I did everything I could to help her, but it wasn't my fucking problem. You know? I offered the help. And when she didn't want to do it, I didn't feel like not getting her driver's license wasn't a reason to break up with her. I believed her that she was going to get it eventually. I would get pamphlets from the DMV and bring them home to her to study. I offered her my car. She said, I don't want to wreck your car, it's too nice. I went and got a rental car. I tried to help her, but I didn't make it the most important fucking thing, you know? And I didn't identify with that. It didn't make me who I am. I know damn well who I am, and she loved me for it. She loved who I was, and she loved my confidence. These people love who you are. You don't seek your identity through other people or through them. They love you because you have a strong identity. It doesn't apply. I'm not saying codependents don't date narcissists. That makes sense. I understand it. I understand that they would. I understand that. But I personally think a codependent, I don't know how good of a fucking mate they would make for a really strong narcissist anyways. Sounds kind of boring, like a pushover, like a rug. They like fighters. They like people that say, hey, no, you shouldn't do that. You're being a loser right now. You got to fix that shit. You can't do that to me. You know, we did that. You know that. We fought. My ex cheated on me, but I didn't allow her and I didn't enable her.
What we're missing, because anyways, for myself, what I was missing was better contact with the parts of me that I've discarded, the parts of me that I have hidden away, the parts of me that I've exiled, the darker sides of me that maybe I can kind of experience through that abusive partner. Anger, the sadness, the shame, all those things that I try to do, all these things outside of myself, just like them, to not feel that shame. Okay. But I think why we're different in terms of our dysregulation and why we have a more complete identity is that codependent or adaptable, kind, open-minded self is more true to really who we are. And maybe we had some other things that made us a little bit more resilient. So there's parts of my identity, I believe, and I've discovered in the last couple of years, we're missing some of the darker sides or the rejected sides. They might not actually be dark and awful, but maybe to me, that's how I perceive them. So to bring them back in is actually can be a shameful experience for me, or a very anxious experience. And I've had to learn, as I've developed resilience to the 3 emotions I talk about all the time, learn in 12 steps: fear, resentment, and self-pity or shame. As I've been more comfortable processing those emotions, dealing with those emotions, being courageous in those emotions, I've been able to have better access to what I saw as my darker parts, the selfish part of me, the part of me that wants something, understanding what I want. And super important. So I don't really care if you call me codependent. You can call me beta. You can call me, I don't know, whatever that thing is that represents, you know, like weak, overly caretaking, what all the shameful things around it. It's okay. You can call me that now, and I can call me that. Although in my mind, how I picture it is that it's something I fall into, that I will always be prone to falling into, that I may fall into my whole life, right? But I understand now, I fall into it when I am emotionally dysregulated. So how do I stop myself from being emotionally dysregulated? Well, sometimes I can't. And so sometimes I act in a way that's codependent, in a way that retrospectively afterwards, like, oh, fuck, I wish I would have really said what I felt, or had a better connection to my own emotions in that moment, or not been so accommodating, like, oh, it's kind of gross how I see myself that, the other day when I was overly accommodating or whatever. If I overly shame myself for it, I can't actually get to changing the root of what's happening, because the more shame you feel around it, the less you will actually take charge and change it. Why? Shame is death. So it's like saying, oh, I really want to improve this thing about myself. How do I improve it? Well, you need to starve yourself, kill yourself, or like, I don't know, like walk through the most dangerous jungle, and if you survive, you get the prize. And like, I think I needed some weapons and armor, and I need, like, I would think I need this, but those metaphorically are just more defense mechanisms. You have to go through that dark forest and that fucked up place. There's no other way around it. And I'm someone who's still in a journey through that forest, here to tell you that it's way better and it's way doable. And if you understand that this is simply when you are emotionally dysregulated, the way you think, that's part of it. But the other part of it is that natural attraction to that person who's so dark, right? Who acts in ways that we sometimes do when we're dysregulated as well, right? But who has far more like of a free license to do that, seemingly with ease. We want that. Part of us is jealous of that, right? But we have projected out onto them our dark self. And the way we act with them in their darkness is a combination of how we wish we could act towards ourselves, with kindness, with compassion, with forgiveness. How many times have you really been actually rageful and angry at the abuse you've received, and you still said to them, hey, I still see the good side in you. I still love you. You're still worthy. We don't say that to ourselves, do we? We've basically take that cast out, inner child or inner or parts of us, however you want to view it. We put it onto them. And then outside of ourselves, we're managing this other thing, right? So we want to say, hey, it's okay to be you. You need to be able to say that to you. But it means on some level, and at some times you have to be alone with those feelings, or more alone. 12 steps is great because you do have the sponsor. You're not alone with it. And therapy, you're not alone with it either, right? But therapy, like, maybe you can't afford that all the daily. 12 steps is free daily. Hey, but you come in touch with that, and through that, I was able to get in touch bit by bit with my own darkness. What's darkness for someone who's a giver or a caretaker or codependent? Darkness is having needs, being needy. The worst, right? How weak are you when you feel needy? Like you need other people, like you need help. The worst. No, I help you, you don't help me. That's the rule, right? So neediness, fear, anger, these emotions that I bury like very easily. They're so buried in me that I don't even interact with. I have to take someone outside of myself, a borderline partner or a narcissistic partner, a cluster B partner. I had to get somebody outside of me just to emulate that. Like when we're healing them, I have this video on introjection. When we're healing them, when we're making them feel better, especially when they're in a place of shame and we can bring them out of that shame, what we don't realize is we're a little bit vampiring off of them. And we're taking them from this place of shame where they feel like, I have no identity, I'm worthless, I have no value. And we're saying, you do have value. We're putting all the stuff in, and we're feeling love and compassion in the face of shame. And that's what we need for ourselves. So we're getting a piece of that, right? Maybe we're giving them, 50% and we're taking 50%, or we're giving them 90 and we're taking 10 or whatever, but you're taking a little bit inside of you as well, because you have this need inside of yourself to address your own neediness, which is also wrapped up in shame. Shame is, remember, that's death, right? So that's why you feel ashamed for being needy. It's complicated, right? But part of that is that to address your own needs is death of your identity. What does that say about your childhood identity, about what was okay and what wasn't okay? It meant that that part of your identity wasn't okay and you adapted to it. And maybe we have more identity because maybe we're just maybe we lean that side more, where we're less like we're more social, extroverted, under seeing the bigger picture. We're all one. Like, we're maybe a little bit more naturally that way, as opposed to someone who's more disagreeable. So we're more naturally that way. So we didn't reject our entire identity, right? It wasn't rejected when we were young because we were more agreeable in terms of the big five personality traits, whereas the narcissist, disagreeable, borderline disagreeable in their core, even though they don't feel like that. They don't feel like they're disagreeable because, and remember, their identity, where they place their identity, is in that codependent, fawning type person. That's how they see themselves. And the other side is the dysregulation. So we can't act out our bad side the way they can. But we act it out by proxy. We get that from them through the 12-step stuff. For me, coming in touch with my resentments and seeing what I'm projecting onto the relationship, seeing what I'm trying to control or what I'm trying to get out of it. It's telling me what I want, right? And my fears, and understanding that the fears are a big trigger, right? What am I afraid of? And to remove that projection, placed under an idea of a loving higher power, is a protection against ego annihilation, against shame, right? You can join your ego to the source of the universe, and there's a protection in that that's beautiful. If you don't want to go to that place, I don't know that you even have to, but you can go to the other places around, working through these steps. What it did is, over time, I got to see my dark side, which was my needs. What did I want? When I took in all of that pain, what did I want? I wanted to be loved. What did I want? I wanted to go home. I wanted to stay out. I wanted to keep watching a movie. I wanted, like, whatever the fuck it is, small and big, I can start to get in touch with these were my needs, these are what I wanted. And that's kind of dark for us. We're not really supposed to have needs, especially in abuse, right? So I can actually start to gain access to parts of my identity that are discarded, that I feel ashamed of. And again, shame means it's not me. They don't deserve to exist. They're not worthy of that. When I'm dysregulated, I turn codependent, and so do you. So do you. When you're dysregulated with somebody who's in that one-up position, that's your dysregulation, is codependency. And if you can embrace it in a way that causes you to get help for it, can be therapy, can be 12 steps, which is free. You will get better, and you will be fuller, and just understand that you don't have to think of it like, oh, I'm always codependent and I need to like get rid of this thing. You'll never get rid of it. What you have to understand is that it's an anxiety. It's caused by emotions and fear of death, shame, right? Fear of death of your identity. So of course, if I call you this, it means you don't have an identity. So of course you're going to come and no, right? You're going to punch back against that. Makes sense.
I tried to help her, but I didn't make it the most important fucking thing. you know? And I didn't identify with that. It didn't make me who I am. I know damn well who I am, and she loved me for it.
Coming back in to conclude, I don't know if this will conclude it or whatever, but borderline is like super dysregulated person. Their true identity, according to them, is codependent, and their false identity is that abusive fight or flight. That's when they're dysregulated. When you're dysregulated, you're the codependent person, and when you're regulated, you're just a kind, good person, according to you, right? According to us, or whatever, right? We're still flawed. We're not perfect. Okay, but this is right. And dysregulated, you're this. So the reason to call yourself codependent is to get help for codependency. It's not to be in a jail your whole life of that's what you are. It's the same thing with BPD. For someone with BPD to come face to face with it in a courageous way and say, this does describe me very well. It's not also to be a life sentence. And for that person to say, you know, I'm always going to be these terrible things that are written about me in forums. Because when they read the terrible stuff about them, they go into shame. Shame is dysregulation. And their dysregulation, like ours, has a level of denial to it, you know, and ours does as well. So that's also why we don't, especially in the beginning, we don't like to talk about codependency at all. We'd rather talk about trauma. We'd rather talk about them. We'd rather talk about all the things that made me like this. And if I can stop the things that made me like this, this is good. And all of the things that made me like this generally are external to us. Some of it's internal. Maybe I need better boundaries or something, but you know, it's the other stuff you really need. But it's just like with them. They'll go, well, I wouldn't be borderline if it wasn't for you. This new person I'm with, I'm regulated. I am so codependent with them that I've formulated a new identity around them, and they're super strong. I can't attach to you anymore because you're really weak. And that's just not what I want my identity to be. That's not how I identify. As soon as I see that weakness and stuff, it makes me feel like the dysregulated me, and I don't like that. So that's not me. But if they can look at it holistically and say, okay, the codependent them is the beginning of an exploration into the rest of their identity, right? Like a little seed, like at the end of the Never-Ending Story. It's an amazing movie, right? She's holding this little thing. She's like, this is all that's left of Fantasia. That might be all that's left of a borderline identity. What do you want it to be? How do you want to fill this up? How do you want to fill this world up? So that's where they are. And their dysregulated self is what we've come to know as the abusive self, which we want to say is their identity, and the other one was false. Well, it's true in that the codependent self that they create that is ever changing how can that be their core self? The dysregulation that seems way more consistent, and they're like, that's you. But maybe neither of them is their identity, right? We know identity is a huge, huge piece, but they're not this. Like if we're not this, if we're not our dysregulation, how can we say they're their dysregulation, right? So yeah, and for us, our identity is larger, but our identity, coming back to the Never-Ending Story, our identity is that, you know, that tower, right? That beautiful tower or whatever. But it's not just that beautiful tower. It's also the other dark sides. It's also these other pieces that we have to kind of go on a courageous adventure to find. And if you can have the courage to use the word codependent when you talk about yourself, you can do 12 steps. And you don't have to say, this is me all the time, because even we don't. And by the way, we don't shame ourselves around it either. We talk about it as like an illness or a sickness, and if we take a medicine, we won't go back into our sickness. And the medicine is these different steps that for me have been fantastic medicine. That's it for today. Thank you all so much. To the recent commenters, Yo, thank you so much. It was so fucking touching to read that stuff. And I have 3 videos in the pipeline on the way. One totally on codependency and the history and the controversies around that term. I have another one coming about brain structures and trauma. And then I have another one on male trauma, the red pill, and the manosphere. So these 3. Stay tuned. Thanks, everybody.